Hello, folks. This is Tim at lovechangegrow.com. And this week's post is the third in the series of the Involuntary Treatment Act, the ITA, Part 3. It's the odds and ends. And this is a brief discussion of the other bits of this odd job. One of the difficulties is the pieces are generally invisible to those who are unaware of the detainment and commitment process. So a lot of today is I'm trying to give examples every day so that you have some relevance to how this works. And again, the purpose of this series of posts is just to present general information about the little known area of mental health detainment and commitment. In part one, I presented sort of the conceptual overview and background. Part two was more of the detailed process of the actual investigation and evaluation that leads towards the detainment and commitment. And here in part three are just the odd little things that I've found that a lot of people haven't thought about or are not aware of. So it's just some odds and ends that I think is helpful to be aware of so that you can advocate for yourself or for family members and things like that, and understand the situation and what happens. So again, the disclaimer is this is just general information. It's not advice, consultation, or recommendations, and it's not legal advice. I'm not an attorney, though I've worked with a lot of attorneys. I've been involved in the mental health court process and all that. But I'm not an attorney, so please, if you need those kind of services or any services or crisis services in your community, talk to the professionals in your community, the law enforcement, crisis services, and if so, an attorney if you need consultation and help and services. So the first piece is I'm just laying out my notes. They're part of this whole post, but so I'm going to kind of present off the cuff, so to speak, but you kind of have some ideas about what I'm saying from the post. So first off, you can think of one of the things I had difficulty with when I was first beginning was the lesser restrictive, and folks often left out the legal piece of that, but actually lesser restrictive refers to the legal perspective. It's not the physical containment perspective when we think about restrictions and physical kind of barriers such as jail or restraints or anything like that. But it's the legal piece where the ITA officer needs to try to avoid increasing legal liabilities for the client that they're evaluating. So I'll just dive into this. I kind of think of it as protecting the future and the past types of abilities for a person to go through their life, to operate their life or live their lives how they see fit. So let's jump into this. And I think it's important for family members and perhaps care and support people in their environment to understand what this is. So I know I've kind of hammered on some of this, but I'm going to try to approach it a little bit differently. So in mental health, the mental health commitment laws speak to people basically 13 years and older. So there's the teenager, basically from 13 up to through the last day, they're 17 years old. Once they turn 18, they become adults, and there's some slightly different um, rules. So, so when I'm evaluating a teenager, I take the perspective that I really want to investigate, especially when a youth, a teenager, has never been detained or never been in a psychiatric hospital before. And so, adolescents, teenagers, there is really a hot mess going on. There's hormones, there's lack of executive functioning and understanding skills and responsibilities and making things happen, and them understanding, oh, I do this, there's consequences, I need to be responsible. And so, especially folks that are 13, 14 years old, they really don't at times understand what's going on and why things are happening, because they're going through a lot of developmental stuff, from hormones to sleeping, exercise, and all that kind of stuff. And there's challenges because perhaps they're not really well prepared or haven't had great examples in their life up till that point. So if I'm evaluating adolescent for hospitalization, particularly involuntary hospitalization, I know that if I detain them, and they will, that will perhaps put some constraints on their future occupational realm of things. For instance, a person with an involuntary mental health history will have difficulty perhaps getting licensed and bonded, perhaps getting types of health or life insurance when they're 30 years old and have a family. They'll have difficulty getting into the military, or if they want to be in law enforcement to some capacity, that could be a hindrance. Certainly if they're going for some type of security clearance, and that's just not, spy agencies and FBI and stuff, but that's also, folks like commercial airline pilots, or working on an oil tanker, or around a nuclear factory, a nuclear station, and things like that. That requires some security clearance. And so I really look at that because I don't want to inadvertently hamper a person. So oftentimes when I'm evaluating teenagers, I really also want their parents there, because we can talk about some things. And I think I mentioned in part 2, once I start that process, I have the ability to talk to people a little more freely and share information and get information from folks. And so when I'm dealing with adolescents, the whole basis is that when you're dealing with kids and adolescents, you really got to evaluate the situation, their environment, who's surrounding them, who's supporting them, what are the dynamics of their experience in their environment. So that there's that. So that's one example about just the lesser restrictive, relative to teenagers. The second example is an adult, and let's say we have a person in their 30s or 40s, and they're going through a messy divorce. Perhaps I've seen this quite a few times. So mom and dad are going through a messy divorce, child custody issues. Perhaps let's just for theoretically, for example, dad has some problems with drug or alcohol, has a history, and when he gets intoxicated, he gets mean, and so you know. So they have this row, this fight and argument. Dad ends up being arrested and goes to jail and spends 4 months, say, in incarcerated in the local county jail. And so, but then he loses his job, loses income. Therefore, mom is also stressed and anxious. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And so let's say she comes in and she's feeling suicidal, feeling lost, and just like it's a hot mess. And so if I detained mom into a psychiatric hospital against her will, well, that can be a great piece of evidence for alcoholic dad to say, look, mom's an unfit mother, evidenced by or demonstrated by that she was detained into a psychiatric hospital. And so dad may be a mean drunk, but mom, having been detained, will have more legal liability weight. So when dad drinks, goes to jail, the only presumption is that he broke the law and went to jail. And yeah, he may need some help, be mean and stuff, and need to, clean up his act. But mom, being perhaps suicidal and maybe made an attempt and just, is having a tough time in the situation, ends up getting detained. Well, it can really create some unanticipated legal complications for her. And so, and it's not it's not infrequent to have those situations. And while one of the parents is in a psychiatric hospital, they get served with divorce papers and child custody issues and all that come into being. So that's an example of how that legal, less restrictive kind of thing works with adults and in a situation of mom and dad. There's also been just, also in a messy divorce, one person goes to a psychiatric hospital and the other person or partner isn't, and they continue to maintain and go about their life. Well, that person could also take advantage of the situation of the other partner being in a psychiatric hospital and go about some businesses like selling a car or moving or doing other types of things that may be a bit shady, if not illegal at times, but certainly can cause problems for the other adult in the relationship. And then last, I think maybe it was the ITA part 3, I talked about granddad being, great upstanding citizen, and now he's has some perhaps memory issues, Alzheimer issues and stuff like that, not doing well. Well, if I put him into a psychiatric hospital, well, the family, perhaps they're not really they don't have a lot of integrity, and so they see that as an opportunity to grab parts of the estate or try to do that, and that can become that involuntary hospitalization can be a great piece of evidence for them to go ahead and pursue guardianship, and which guardianship of there's in Washington, there's guardianship of the person and guardianship of the finances. And so you can have one or the other or both. But that's how sometimes the civil mental health commitment piece can really end up kind of being an inadvertent liability for a person. Um, so the next piece is go voluntarily. This does have some significance and which relates to what I just said. You know, if you go voluntarily, the presumption into a psychiatric hospital, the presumption is that you recognize or have recognition that you need some help, you have insight and good judgment. And if you go involuntary, it presumes that you don't recognize the situation, can't understand what's going on, and you don't have any good judgment. You don't have the capacity for it, or you say, no, oh, hell no, I'm not going in. And you can sort of see this as a spectrum. On one hand, you know, the presumption is that any adult has the physical, mental, emotional sovereignty to live their life however they see fit, as long as they're not a danger to self or others or property and the stuff I went through last week in part 2, unless they've been declared otherwise. And so a declaration that the person is requires some guardianship or is a different process, but the civil mental health piece of commitment can be a great piece of evidence for that. The next piece is applications. So anytime a person is going perhaps for some type of risk or high risk or security type of work and put in applications, oftentimes those applications have a little waiver of confidentiality, meaning, hey, so you want this great job, great money, some security clearance and stuff like that, or you're wanting a license, applying for a license, you've gone to school, or bonding and stuff like that. That little waiver of confidentiality basically gives the potential employer the ability to dive into your records. And so, if you don't tell them you've been in a psychiatric facility involuntarily and they find out, well, you've lied on your application, you're out of here. If you do tell them, well, they're probably going to go, oh my gosh, and toss that aside. Now, that's the involuntary piece. But if you've gone in as a voluntary person, there's a lot of people out there that are on psychiatric meds, mood stabilizers, or antidepressants these days. There's a huge amount. And so, so just because a person is on some anti-anxiety medications or antidepressants and things like that doesn't mean they're an unfit employee or unfit worker or can't handle the pressure of the situation. But it's just one of those things to be aware of. So an example would be like a commercial airline pilot or military, or working with children in schools, or perhaps being a financial advisor or in some fiduciary capacity, things like that. And just a quick little side note is, if I were an investigator for an insurance company or whatever, I'd go straight to the medical records or to the billing records. If I see a billing for some high-powered psychiatric medication, I'm going to go, I wonder why that is. And maybe I might not be able to get to the actual records and diagnosis, but that little red flag of, geez, they were on some SSRI or Prozac or something like that for 6-8 months, I'm gonna go, I wonder what's going on there, and gives a person such as an investigator to, let's dive into this further. The next piece is gun control. And I don't want to get into pro guns, pro rights, or, gun control kind of thing. But here's the deal. Anybody that has been detained for up to 120 hours at an evaluation and treatment center, a psychiatric facility, and then they might get cut loose. They could get cut loose 24 hours later, but they have been detained. And so in the state of Washington, then a person is basically loses their right to possess a firearm for 6 months after the detention. Now, it's not really clear how that gets restored and where are the guns kept and by whom. Do they get turned into the county sheriff, or do a family member say, okay, I'll take them, lock them up in my home, they don't have access to it, and that kind of thing. Or, does at the end of 6 months, that just disappears? I'm not that familiar with the gun laws, but there are the RCW 9.41 basically speaks to gun control, as I understand it. Now, if a person is detained for 14 days, for up to 14 days or longer, then they lose their right to possess a firearm until it is restored by the Superior Court, that basically ordered the commitment. That's how it's kind of worded now. Does that mean by the actual mental health court or by some other Superior Court judge? And there's, you dive into that, there's some, conditions that are kind of outlined that the Superior Court needs to kind of address and get back to that yes, the person no longer presents any risk or minimal risk by possessing a firearm, and they can have their firearms back. And how that's done, I don't know. I'd imagine a person would have to go and hire an attorney and say, hey, attorney, help me. I need a petition to have a hearing, to have my right to restore my ability to possess firearms restored. And this whole other piece is when this happens, whether a person is detained or committed, there's a process which basically ends up in the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, and apparently that's the system the FBI uses to kind of, says, yeah, can the person have firearms in a background check kind of thing. Let's see here. Let me move my cursor here. The other thing is, even if a person has been detained, a lot of people misunderstand that if they've been detained, they think, oh, the state then pays for their hospitalization, which is not the case at all. By far, a lot of people that do get detained are probably fairly poor, and they're on some type of entitlement or assistance, or not, but they might qualify. And so the hospital will go and work with the person, get them enrolled into that entitlement, so they have access to getting some of their bill for their for their stay in the psychiatric hospital taken care of. And it depends on how much they make and stuff like that. Now, the whole thing is, if you have health insurance that has the mental health rider or piece attached to it, which I believe most insurances are required to do now. There's still a point of getting perhaps pre-approved, knowing exactly what is covered inpatient and outpatient medications. Sometimes, the insurance will only cover the generic medications. They won't cover the brand name. And some of the brand name new medications that come out are really prohibitively expensive. And that's just one of those things that get talked that is discussed in treatment teams and stuff like that. Well, let's say, hey, this person seemingly does well on this brand name medication, but once they leave the hospital, their insurance isn't going to cover that. So those are kind of things that people really don't aren't aware of. The other thing is, if a person is concerned about confidentiality, the ability to kind of protect their history is, especially in outpatient kind of things, is you go to a private practice kind of therapist or a professional and paying in cash, and not running it through the insurance company if you have it and stuff like that. And that gives a person a little more, I guess, shield against to protect their confidentiality. The other thing is, when dealing with insurance, in some ways the game for insurance, they're trying to preserve their ability and to protect their livelihood as a business, as a corporation. So just realize a lot of times there's denials, there's delays in claims, and then they may move to some kind of a administrative law kind of hearing where that kind of stuff happens. So I know when I was a case manager, I helped some of my caseload go through this, especially whether it was Social Security, disability, or some other things. And it was like, it's a process. And there's, okay, they deny. So then you have the opportunity to respond in a certain amount of time, 2 weeks, 30 days, 60 days. Well, you got to make sure you track that and make sure you appeal that in a timely manner, because otherwise, if you miss those appeals, sometimes you have to start over from zero, which then leads to the whole thing about records is anything you sign, like treatment plans, treatment agreements, sign it, date it, and get a copy, and get them to put their signature, the staff signature, or whoever is helping or asking you to fill this out. They also need to sign and date it, and then get a copy. And especially if you're in the insurance or trying to get on some type of publicly funded entitlement program, Medicare, Medicaid kind of stuff, it's really helpful to get a copy of all that stuff. And just as you're going through that process, just make sure, hey, I want a copy. And make sure you have that, and then try to keep them organized. Organize them by date, provider kind of thing. And those are your hard copies of your medications, records, insurance correspondence, bills, invoices. And the other thing is, don't give away those records. Don't hand them over. If somebody goes, hey, I need, some history of, so you've been in a psychiatric hospital 3 different times. So give them a copy, make photocopies, or say, here, copy them, and I want them back immediately. I'm not leaving here without my originals. And they can copy or scan things in. And part of the reason for doing this is that, for the most part, medical records have moved to the electronic medical records, so they don't do paper anymore. But you can be sure things are scanned in. So, that's important. So as you're leaving the hospital, as you're signing documents, get those. And if you're not able to, or a family member is involved as on your behalf as an advocate, family member, grab those things and make sure and try to keep them organized and stuff. Because they'll help you out. Because when there's this other thing called the ICD-10, which is basically the coded billing process. So on one hand, you have the medical records, which says this was the treatment, and over here you have the ICD-10, which is the billing or the coding thing. So here's the treatment, here's the coding, and which allows for the payment and the insurance. And there can be some kind of hanky little things about the electronic medical records. You know, a mistype of an ICD-10 code can just go, what's going on? Or, you know, and so, you know, when you get into those situations, well, we're not going to pay this because, you know, it was for a mastectomy. No, it was for a psychiatric hospitalization. Well, our records, you know, say, you know, it was for a mastectomy in the ICD coded billing thing. But you have the records for, no, it was a psychiatric stay, a voluntary one kind of thing that was pre-approved and that the treatment team presented. So that's a good reason, those kind of things of keeping records and understanding how that works a bit is helps you advocate and protect in the unfortunate event something goes a bit sideways. And then the last piece of this kind of records deal is, geez, if there's a parent or a family member that can advocate for a child or help an adult understand what is going on, because a lot of these mental health crisis kind of detainment situations, you know, there's a lot going on. A person's distracted, unable to concentrate, unable to process. And so having a family member or advocate of some sorts that can help both kind of give information to the treatment team or the ITA evaluator, such as myself, you know, it helps immensely to understand some of the things that in the environment and what supports there are or the lack of supports and what's been going on. So the next piece here is what I put legal bits. And now again, I'm not an attorney, but I'm kind of aware of some of this stuff. So I almost forgot to do this, but one of the things is where, you know, and there's this thing that if you're not in the medical field and not in the provider field kind of thing in a hospital, there's this thing called the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, the EMTALA. And under EMTALA was designed to basically prevent dumping of potential patients. Or here, you know, a person gets picked up in an ambulance and taken to the ER, and the ER goes, no, take them over to this other ER on the other side of town or in this next county and kind of thing. So the EMTALA Act was basically to prevent that. So, you know, in general, whether it's police, medics, fire departments, whatever, the general thought and reasonable thought is you take a person to the nearest emergency room or emergency department, and they're screened. If they have treatment or offered treatment to, you know, basically have the person safe and maintain their health and safety and all that. And in that process, the person, the social worker, the ER doc, the ITA officer and stuff like that cannot suggest, let's move the person over here because there's better treatment or other things. Now, a client or a family member or advocate can say, look, you don't have the services here. Let's move them over here to this other hospital that does that. The client can initiate that, but the professional cannot. And so there's this thing, basically, it prevents hospitals from refusing patients who require specialized capacities or facilities if the hospital has the capacity to treat them. So here's the issue. A person gets brought into the ER and they have some psychiatric need, crisis. And so the little hospital, out in the rural area and stuff, doesn't have a specialized ability they don't have a psychiatric unit, they don't have a psychiatrist on staff or available to come in and do a consult and stuff like that. And so just that's part of it. Okay, they don't have the capacity or the capabilities. Okay, so then another hospital, say in the next county over, does have a psychiatric unit and stuff. Okay, and now, I can call as ITA officer. I can go, okay, you don't have, this little ERA does not have, hospital does not have the psychiatric capacity, but Hospital B does. And if Hospital B has a bed and they meet the medical necessity and all that, I can send the person from point A to point B, involuntarily or even voluntarily. And that's all very kosher and stuff like that. The problem is that, let's say the client is in Hospital A in their emergency services, and B over here maybe has some beds, but because of their maybe, and this is where the whole dispositional thing in part 2 becomes nightmarish. So B may have a bed, it may be their last bed, but they're trying to save it for somebody in their county, and thus in this other county, in Hospital A, I'm having a tough time moving them over there. And so, if the person was brought in by the medics, the police, the fire department, they got to go to Hospital A because that's the nearest hospital. Okay. But if the family was bringing in, say, their child that's 14 years old, that's just gone off the wall, well, the reasonable thing, and all I could really say in a professional capacity, is take them to the nearest hospital, the nearest ER, because that's a reasonable thing. But if the family member, mom or dad, goes, well, A doesn't have an adolescent psych unit, but B does over here, and though it may be a little further, maybe an hour away or 30 minutes away, but if they decided, hey, I'm taking my son or daughter over to B because they have a psychiatric unit, once that child hits the psychiatric unit, once that child hits Hospital B's ER department, well, they pop to the top of the list. And so if there's a psychiatric bed there in B, and nobody else is in the ER asking for that bed or requiring that bed, then that child's going to get it. But if the child went to ERA, the Hospital A, and now it can be very difficult to get that child from Hospital A to Hospital B, where the adolescent psychiatric unit is. And there's all kinds of reasons, and the whole dispositional piece is very fluid. It's like take a number. Okay, we have 2 beds for available in a psych unit, but we have 4 patients in our ER, or let's say we have 1 patient in our ER, but we also got calls from 3 other ERs that don't have psych units wanting their patient in the bed. So it becomes a real kind of negotiation. Who's who, what's what, how can that psychiatric unit, do they have the staffing, do they have the docs, what's their acuity level and all that. And so that becomes nightmarish at times. Now, this is all invisible. You won't hear a professional going through all these different scenarios and stuff, but that's what does happen. So going back to the EMTALA piece is if you're aware of the EMTALA law and how that works, sometimes because you're a family member, because it's presumed voluntary, come on, son, let's get in the car, we're driving over here. Boom, that can happen. A professional can't tell you that, because then they're exposing themselves to risk of, hey, and something terrible happens. It's like, oh, the professional told me to go over here. And it's like, that becomes a messy thing. So I'm not an attorney, but that's just how some of the dispositional kind of things work. And it's something to be aware of, whether, and even psychiatric facilities can be specialized, such as adolescents or geriatrics, or geropsych units, or where a unit does sort of dual diagnosis. They do sort of the detox from drugs and alcohol and the mental health piece. So there's different units specialized in different things, and sometimes it can be quite challenging to get the client what they need at the place that actually provides it. And so again, if you're in that situation, talk to the professional. Things change, and ideally do it before. Okay, another little thing that I've always thought, this changes here, and that's when you think about when a person has been detained and there's going to be a hearing. There's a petition written for a 14-day or a 90-day lesser or more, or restrictive court order, or 180-day lesser or more kind of thing. The theory is you have 2 independent evaluators, and one is generally required to be an MD psychiatrist kind of thing. Occasionally, they'll let a psychologist do it. The other person can also be an MD psychiatrist, psychologist, or a mental health professional, i.e. a court liaisons person that has a master's level training and some interest in doing that. Those 2 individual people are independent, and if one of them says, there's not enough basis to petition the court, then without one person can't do that. You got to have 2 people that do that and agree to that, and to then write the petition and file it and ask for the hearing. So just something to be aware of. This is more really for individual advocacy. Is I've seen it done both ways, where one of the independent evaluators does not work for the hospital, and so there's not a conflict of interest, And I've also so that it's more clear cut that way. But I've also seen it where the court liaisons person is an employee of the hospital along with a psychiatrist. And so, and in theory, the psychiatrist has more weight, is more the boss, more the last the last in line. They kind of hold the weight and go, hey, no, we're going for this. And so there's just, I've often thought that was a very interesting thing for, how do they get around the ethical things of conflict of interest, or how do they maintain that independence ability as co-petitioners? How do they agree? Is there a process for that? And last thing about court petitions and hearings, a lot of people don't realize this, but at the 90-day and 180-day petitions, whether it's inpatient or outpatient, lesser restrictive, more restrictive, there is the option for a jury trial, and the respondent, i.e. the patient, can request a jury trial, and there's some parameters around that it needs to be filed and heard within a certain number of days, and this and that. It can be continued and other things, but that's all about contacting the attorneys, your public defender or your own attorney about that. And oftentimes jury trials don't happen often because they're expensive, so there's a lot of pressure not to do those. It tends to back up the unit because the person's waiting for a hearing, and so that takes up the bed actually, and the person may not need to be in the hospital, a medical necessity, but because there's a hearing or a petition, they're entitled to a jury trial. So that's something that a lot of people aren't aware of. So next is the clinical formulation, and you've heard me say a lot of things about clinical formulation before, and so that's really, why is this happening? What's the diagnosis? Why is that happening? And what's the treatment? So it's really important to be aware of. So an example of that with drugs and alcohol, the person comes in, they're intoxicated. Do they need to be in a psychiatric hospital? Generally not. Do they need to be in a medical bed for detox? Perhaps yes. Oftentimes they need to be there. And so then they clear and they can, sober up and go home. Or maybe they sober up and then you see some mental health kind of presentations, some PTSD, some depression and all that kind of stuff. And so, I believe I started out, as with this question of you have 5 people, no, wait, sorry about that. That's in another post. That's in an upcoming post. Probably I don't know if it'll happen this next week, but it's basically going to be a post on suicide and violence and risk assessment. So anyway, the treatment for drug and alcohol is don't do any more drugs or alcohol. Get yourself cleaned up, get detoxed, get yourself cleaned up, learn some new skills, establish a new life kind of thing. And we know from research it takes about 2 years to kind of, make that change from swimming in a glass to being on dry land and doing well. In the cases of like delirium is generally a medical condition or something. It could be as a result of drug interaction, sepsis, urinary tract infection, thyroid levels are off, ammonia levels, all kinds of things, oxygen levels. And so, even though the person may seem very disorganized and don't know what's going on, where they're at, what's happening, what day it is, that isn't a psychiatric issue, it is a medical issue. So a lot of times folks go, geez, they need to be someplace, but what they need is medical evaluation and some workup and be medically addressed. In the cases of dementia, dementia is, memory care kind of places. Really the issue with that is in some ways containment. Sure, you can have a psych consult that comes in and goes, yeah, okay, the person's a little more agitated or they seem a little depressed and hopeless. Well, let's give them some medications. Let's get them in a more enriched environment where they're more engaged, where there's better staffing, better activities, there's music and walks and the family can come in more and all that kind of stuff. That's not a psychiatric issue it to the level that requires medical necessity for a psychiatric facility. Then you have things like developmental disabilities, such as Asperger's or other kinds of all this other kind of stuff. And a lot of times, those can be changes of environment that can be quite helpful. And here's what often happens. A person with some developmental disabilities is in their group home and just irritable, irate, getting into arguments or throwing dishes and stuff like that, maybe making some vague threats. And so they're brought into the ER, and now they're in the ER and they're perfect. They're engaging, they're like, so we kind of take a really hard look at, well, if it was a psychiatric condition, the person would likely continue or to a fairly high level of this outrageous behavior. But now they come in and the person is like, oh, hey, this is a new environment. This is interesting. Somebody's paying attention to me. I get to meet somebody else new and they're giving me, snacks or let me watch videos or something like that. And it's like, okay, that's more of an environmental thing. What needs to change in the environment? They don't need a psychiatric facility. Sure, a psychiatric facility can kind of help in a very short term, but oftentimes it's a more enriched environment because there's a higher staffing ratio, more people to interact with, playing ping pong or cards, or that having some art therapy and stuff like that. So folks can do really well and with that, but it's not really reaches a level of required psychiatric intervention. So we look at the environment, what's stressful, what's the situation. Sometimes there's financial aspects. And what I mean by that is if a person, say a person is in an assisted care or memory care facility or a group home, and the issue oftentimes is staffing and training and what's available in the environment that can support the person with developmental disabilities or the geriatric person with some memory issues and stuff like that. And it's not about the psychiatric care. Psychiatric care can be great, but what the person really needs is a better environment. Now, that agency or organization providing that environment, what do they have for resources? Do they have their psychiatrist that can step in and look at medications or do some medical workup? Are there pain issues? Are there, issues of urinary tract infections and things like that, which can be sorted out by, their medical staff. Here's an example. I was called out late in one evening. County sheriff asked me to come out to their little office out in a small little town, and so I get out there, and there's this elderly gentleman who had walked away from a nursing home, basically a memory care kind of facility, nursing home that specialized in dementia care, and so obviously this elderly gentleman didn't understand what was going on. He had never had any guardianship proceedings. So in theory, he still maintained from the legal standpoint, that maintain the ability to say yes or no and stuff like that. No, I don't want to be in this memory care facility, though he didn't know what the memory care facility was about. Okay, and so that memory care facility said, look, we can't take him back. He's beyond our capacity. and so basically, this guy had walked away. They contained him in their little county sheriff office there. And so, I said, hey, I called up the memory care facility and said, hey, come on. This is the middle of the night. Let's just get this guy back to his own bed, and stuff like that. And they said, absolutely not. We can't do that. It's like, what? And so, since I was out in the community, I said, look, I got to stop by and I got to grab some records and stuff. If you're not going to take them back, I need records and notes and all this other stuff. And so I get out there and to the memory care facility. I'm, doing my thing, going through the geriatric checklist, which is provided here and stuff, and trying to figure out, okay, what's going on. And when I look at the records, there really isn't any record that says why the person can't come back. And so I get a hold of the director of nursing at this place, and I said, look, I need something from you guys that state why you can't take this person back. Come on. This is not the right thing to do at 9:00 at night. This gentleman should be, getting ready for bed, have his snack and all that stuff. So anyway, long story short is, I end up detaining the guy because I don't have any other thing I can do. I can't, in good conscience cut him loose. The county sheriff doesn't want to cut him loose. He'll go wander off into the woods here in the Pacific Northwest and get lost and die of hypothermia. That's not going to happen. Okay, you forced my hand, I'm detaining him. So anyway, throughout this, I ended up also reporting the memory care facility and say, look, I think this is a case of abandonment. And, folks weren't happy with me. And it's rare that kind of happened, leads up to that point. But it also is a way that you kind of think about, in this clinical formulation with the elderly, the developmental disabilities, the dementia type of facilities, in my mind, job is to, provide a safe, healthy, therapeutic to the best of their ability environment. And if they can't do that, they really need to demonstrate why it is. And to me, it's like, okay, so if you can't do that, what do you need to be able to do that? More staffing, consults? Are there other options to do? So part of the reason why I've done some of this with the checklist, so that as family, if you have a grandparent, or let's say you have a child that has special needs, those are kind of things to kind of start to kind of consider, to ask to be involved, because you are going to be family member, mom, dad, perhaps, or whoever. A family member is going to be the best advocate for the patient or your family that is in need, that individual. So, the checklist for dementia, geriatrics, delirious, that kind of stuff is I provided just because those are checklists that we were kind of trained to use to ask those kind of questions. And you having kind of now gone through some of this, you can understand, hey, it doesn't take a person like me, a home plate umpire in the middle of the night, you have these kind of tools that are available to you. And by doing this proactively or strategically, you have a much better chance of understanding what is needed and where to go, and how to make things happen. The other piece I put down here was, just for professionals, the statement or affidavit and notes for initial detainment. Basically, if you look at the questions, or what this is basically, it's the kind of prescription for a petition for commitment, because these are basically the pieces that the judge or the prosecutor needs to hear and understand. So that's that from the professional inpatient treatment team. And then, as I also made some notes about, gave you some notes about, if you're a family member needing to make a statement of concern, this is kind of how you do that. One little piece is, whether your phone number goes on or not, you may not want that, but you need to have a way where the prosecutor or the court liaisons person can get a hold of you, and the inpatient treatment team, can say, hey, look, can you come in and talk to us? We can't tell you anything, because confidentiality works one way. Let's say your son is detained and nobody will tell you where he is, but you find out where he is. And let's say if I have a 14-year-old person I've detained, I'm calling the parent and saying, hey, look, here's your son, here's what's happened, here's where your son is at, here's here's the phone number. And as ITA officer, I can do that. In fact, it's ideally, that's part of the process of the disposition. And then you can call up and say, hey, I want to talk to the social worker or the psychiatrist. Well, the psychiatrist may not have a release of information to talk to you, but you don't need a release of information from your 14-year-old son to talk to them. So you can share all kinds of data, experience, the situation that's going on, and that will immensely help the inpatient treatment team to more quickly try to figure out what's going on and how to best give them the services and the treatment, the medication. Because if they don't know, and your sons have been on various different medications, and some have worked, some haven't worked, some have side effects and all that stuff, or that they're already, have a great outpatient treatment team with a psychiatrist and a psychologist and a counselor, and you got consults, that really helps the treatment team really focus and narrow down on what can we do for the inpatient part that's going to support the outpatient part, and thus, a shorter hospital stay, better coordination between the inpatient and outpatient. And maybe the outpatient goes, yeah, we want to try this medication, just as, before we can do that, we got to get the young person off of this medications before we can start the other new medication that we think will work. We can't do that, or we're not comfortable in doing that without some great observation and support, 24/7. Inpatient team can do that, and make that happen much easier. And when they have that kind of interaction direction, and it may be through you as the parent that helps that process go, and coordinate. So that's part of why I'm doing this, is to let you guys know this kind of stuff. Then as an IT officer, you know, I got to write up something. It's basically an 8-point write up. Here's generally, you know, what we see, and you know, just so you know, that's sort of, you know, the quick kind of down and dirty. You know, it may be a few pages long. Generally not more than four or five pages long, but also sometimes we come along and when we're done and when we're, you know, putting the person in the hospital, we're also gotten outpatient treatment records, sometimes criminal records, and all kinds of things. And it's not unusual to have a 50, 70-page packet of information we're sending to the inpatient team so that we can give them a heads up. And that's a form of advocacy to help that person that may not have be in a great space to help the inpatient treatment team, you know, to get what they need. Let's see. A safety management plan is kind of like, you can sort of, that is, especially with people that have a spouse or a child or, you know, a grandparent. Hey, this is a list of kind of, you know, I talked about a spectrum of interventions. When a person has this presentation, do this intervention. And that's really what kind of a safety management plan is, so that, you know, when your family member is at home, you go, oh my gosh, what do I need to do? Do I need to get them back in the ER? No, not quite yet. Have you done this, this, and this? And so, but when it reaches this point, well, yes, bring them in, you know, kind of thing. Or get them to a facility that specializes in that type of care that the person needs. The other last piece is, remember, mental health treatment is kind of three prongs. Medications, if they work, and the issue is their quality of life on medications, off medications. The second treatment prong is just skills development, stress management skills, relationship skills, decision-making skills, how to have a more balanced life, you know, keeping yourself, you know, that kind of stuff, where you go in and talk with the counselor, get some ideas. Oh yeah, this works for me. Yeah. Better mate selection perhaps, or whatever. And then the last one is the wellness deal. You know, and you look at eating well, sleeping well, getting good exercise, hanging out with a group of folks that are supportive, doing your passions, keeping yourself curious and learning new things, and taking care of your spiritual needs how you see fit. And so I'll leave the link in the post about the wellness. My closing thought here is that, you know, throughout my career, I've met some wonderful people that are like, they're master teachers, and they've, you know, given me lessons or a cause to stop and think about, what am I doing? And they've pierced sort of my illusions and delusions, and gotten me to move from being more ego-centered and going, what am I doing? How am I having, is this the right thing to do? Is there some integrity there? If I were them, how would I want to be treated? And I kind of equate that with compassion, you know. And sometimes compassion is, hey, telling the person straight up, here's what's happening, here's what I think should happen, and here's a way to go about doing that. And that's the whole thing with this My Love Change Grow kind of project. And then also gracefulness, being able to be patient and wait for the opportunities. You know, some of these souls are just, you know, they're angels with tattered wings, but man, they are great. And I'm going to leave you with a story here. And years ago, I'll call her Anne. Her name, I'll just call her Anne. Anyway, I think most of you have probably seen Harry Potter, the movie, and this patient, that I call Anne, she looked like Dobby, the house elf, that's in rags and all that, and thinking socks are the most wonderful thing. Well, anyway, I'd walk into the unit, and some days she would be pleasant, just a sweetheart. And she looked a lot like Dobby, just like, you know. Anyway, um, and other days, you know, I'd walk into the unit and be doing my thing, and she would just tear into me. And this would happen, and seemingly random to me. And I started going, wow, how does this happen? What's triggering her and all that? And she got me to really think about, what am I putting out? What is my energy that I'm kind of, interacting with people, all kinds of folks. And this was a 50-bed admission unit at the state hospital. So we had 50 people on this one unit. And so there's a lot going on, but Anne sometimes would just tear into me. Other times she was just this very pleasant, sweet, older lady. And anyway, but she got me to first start to go inside and kind of question, what am I putting out? What am I bringing into work, from my, life with kids and all the other stuff. And what she did was really teach me how to manage, how I interact and what I put out. And I fondly remember this woman, and I don't think I'll ever forget her, because it really taught me a lesson that I really didn't discover until later. Wow, she keyed me into going, hey, how am I managing my energy? And so I think what I just want to leave you with is, sometimes these folks that are seemingly most in need and just out of there, they are sharp. They can read people well when you stop to think about, hey, a lot of these folks have been abused, taken advantage of. They don't trust people very well, and with good reason. And so they are very sharp in reading people, reading what even though you may have seemingly great intentions and want to help people, it can be humbling and challenging to learn to interact with folks that are seemingly quite in need, and figuring out how to do that with some integrity, some compassion, and gracefulness. So that's it for this week, the ITA thing, part 3. So I mentioned at some point I'm going to do the violence, suicide kind of risk assessment kind of deal. And I don't know if I'll do that this next week or not, but it's on my short list. So stay tuned and have a great week. Thanks. Love you guys.